So menopause, this is a big topic, and it's something that many women can sail through with no symptoms. But actually, menopause can be a very real trauma for some women, especially for those who've had to experience a surgical menopause because of a hysterectomy operation for whatever reason. So it is important to recognize that it can be really vastly different from one woman to another. And there are lots of symptoms that people don't often realize. So, for example, 30% of women will have bone pains and body aches when they go through menopause, but they may never have associated it with menopause. People usually know about hot flushes, but it can also be associated with insomnia and sexual dysfunction, some vaginal dryness, but also vaginal atrophy, which is, again, something that's not really talked about, but can be exquisitely painful. And it's usually associated with vaginal dryness, but it can cause a severe itching and discomfort in the vaginal area, to the point for some women where they are unable to have sex, or they can't sometimes even sit down because of the irritation that is causing them. So this is something that it is really important to be aware of, because there are treatments available for this. What else can happen? Mood changes can happen as well. And you can have issues with hair thinning. You can get issues with incontinence or urgency from the bladder. Our bone health can be affected. So we can have increased risk of fragility, fractures, and loss of bone mineral density. And it's natural, in fact, for many women to experience some redistribution of their weight. Because, as I mentioned before, as the ovaries are producing less estrogen, the body likes to maintain balance, and the body knows that fat cells can also produce estrogen. So it's actually really common for women to then have a redistribution of fat, to have more visceral fat or belly fat, to help to maintain that equilibrium of estrogen exposures. And in fact, in the Western world, about 65% of postmenopausal women will experience being overweight. And that's partly why. Now, should we have to accept these changes quietly? Well, I don't think that we should. There are many ways to deal with these unpleasant symptoms, and your doctor will be able to talk you through the medical treatments available, including the use of hormone replacement therapy if you should choose to try it. I want to let you know that in terms of bone mineral density, in the UK, it's actually HRT is actually the primary way that we can help women to reduce their bone mineral density loss during menopause. And so it's definitely worth looking into. If you are an eligible candidate for HRT, it may improve your risk of reducing your bone mineral density as you go through menopause. Can diet and lifestyle make a difference? Well, yes, I believe it really can. But let me just kind of go through a little bit more about what you might expect. Now, in the years coming up to menopause, you might be surprised to find that you actually have more frequent periods and then they become heavier. And this is because as the ovaries start to run out of eggs, our hormone levels can start to go a bit crazy. They don't just drop. They can actually rise dramatically as your body is trying to stimulate your ovaries to produce more estrogen. But eventually they do become more sporadic, and eventually they stop. And the diagnosis of menopause is usually a year after your last period. So I guess what I'd like to say is that it's worth also giving yourself a fresh perspective on some of these changes. Because I don't want you to think that having a menopause is the end of your joie de vivre, or that everything is downhill from there. Because actually, I think that menopause can bring great gifts with it. Now, there's actually, I think I've mentioned this once before, but there are only 3 mammals that experience menopause. Humans are obviously one of those mammals, but the other 2 might surprise you. Many people guess that it's chimpanzees or apes that experience menopause, but actually it's pilot whales and orcas. And the reason I think that menopause is so important is because it allows the female of the species a way to maintain their importance and contribution to society after their reproductive years. And this is actually a huge gift. Now, remember, with pilot whales and with orcas, it's often the mother or the grandmother that leads the pod. And I think that we perhaps have it wrong in Western society, because it seems that biologically we're designed to be a matriarchal society. We're designed for women to play an integral role in the continuation of our community links and life, and looking after grandchildren and the young people of the community, and that we actually have a lot of advantages in being able to maintain healthy lives after we're able to give birth. So also, actually, social context is quite important when we deal with the menopausal transition. So there was a study in 2007 in Ecuador that showed middle-aged women there felt that they gained in both maturity and confidence when they went through menopause. And again, interviews of women in Jordan back in 2008 showed that menopause was actually a positive transition for them and a route to wise old age. Interestingly, with the Hadza tribe in Tanzania, they really sort of emphasized the grandmother hypothesis in action, because the elder females of the tribes would be foraging, giving away food, offering childcare, and were actually, and still are, vital and a respected part of the tribe. So I think it's a great idea if we can aim to reframe menopause, not just the women going through it, but for the whole of society, in order to support women who are experiencing symptoms, but also to uplift women so that they feel more valued in society and that they can bring so much more than just the ability to reproduce. Also, it can be perhaps a new dawn where you don't have to worry about periods or fibroids or endometriosis or childbearing or breastfeeding. So my hope is that as a society, we can begin to revere and respect the matriarch for her wisdom and her longevity and her valuable contribution to our lives. I don't know what you think. I hope that you agree. Let's talk a bit about making the most of this important transition. So I think we can look for inspiration in the medical literature. There was an interesting series of interviews conducted by an anthropologist called Margaret McGill of women in the US, in Canada, and Japan. And what she noticed was that women in Japan tend not to have hot flushes to the same extent as American women, or indeed have a word for the phenomenon. And the only symptoms that they mentioned, other than the cessation of periods, was shoulder stiffness. And men reported this symptom about as often as the women did. Why? Well, apparently the women were not more shy about reporting symptoms, according to her research. So could it be their food? Well, the traditional Japanese diet is based on rice with relatively little meat and no dairy. So it could be the fact that avoiding dairy hormones might have played a part. Japanese women were also seen to be slimmer on average, meaning that the estrogenic effect of excess fat cells was minimized. But also Japanese women tend to eat a lot of soy in the form of miso soup and tofu, and tempeh, edamame beans. And I mentioned before, soy is a really important protein for period pains, as we discussed, but also it is a complete source of amino acids and phytoestrogens. Now, the isoflavones or phytoestrogens contained in soy, specifically genistein, have been shown in studies to improve menopausal symptoms. They've also been shown to improve bone mineral density and reduce the risk of breast cancer, prostate cancer, and colon cancers. So it's not just women who benefit. One study followed Japanese women over time, and those who ate more soy were 68% less likely to experience hot flushes, or hot flashes, as you call them, than those who did not. Various studies do have mixed results, and it's likely that overall there is a definite benefit for most women. But interestingly, our microbiome can play a part in whether we respond to the genistein within soy, whether we can hopefully get those benefits. So again, it's about increasing fiber-rich foods to help support a thriving microbiome. What about what about herbal remedies, not hormone remedies, herbal remedies? Well, they can be, I would say, a lifeline for a lot of women, but the results are mixed. So I would advise you that if you do try a herbal remedy, it can really be a trial and error approach. Herbs with anecdotal evidence of benefits with this menopausal transition would include things like black cohosh, red clover, ginseng, ashwagandha, which is an adaptogenic Indian Ayurvedic herb, and sage leaf as well. I do want to give you a note of caution because the supplement industry is generally not well regulated. So unless your remedy has traditional herbal registration or a similar sort of third-party testing perhaps on their website, it's going to be hard to know the concentrations and active ingredients that you're consuming. So do let your doctor know as well if you're trying something in case it interferes with another medication that you're taking, which happens with a few different things, especially things like St. John's wort that many people use for depression.